From your fryer to the table, it's a quick trip for crispy fries. But how about a crosstown delivery? McCain SureCrisp fries are designed to go from fryer to container to carrier to passenger seat across town during rush hour down a shortcut that wasn't all that short to a doorstep before they hit the table. And that first bite, the crispiness speaks for itself. To the last bite, McCain SureCrisp fries. Go the distance. See how far our fries can take your business at surecrisp.com/delivery.
Hello, and welcome to Menu Talk with Pat and Bret. I'm your co-host, Bret Thorn, Senior Food and Beverage Editor of Nation's Restaurant News and Restaurant Hospitality.
And I'm Pat Cobe, Senior Menu Editor at Restaurant Business. Welcome.
How you doing, Pat? I haven't seen you in a couple of days because we just got back from the National Restaurant Show, and so I'm tired still.
Yeah, we're both pretty tired. We walked the floor. There were 2,200 exhibitors, from what I understand, which is quite a lot. And we were compelled to try and taste and sip a lot of different food and drinks.
Yeah, it's tricky because also, of course, we have associates we want to meet, and I have to sometimes be a marketing tool for our ad salespeople, and show up at booths and be polite. And I'm really happy to do all of that. And then there are, almost obligatory parties and stuff that you have to go to. So great, but I also have to walk, 10, 11 football fields worth of show floor and see what's going on. So it's a difficult balancing act and a lot of hours.
It's definitely a challenge, and I'm sure a lot of people are very jealous that we get to eat so much good food, but it can be tiring.
Yeah, So what sorts of interesting things did you see on the floor, Pat?
Well, I was looking, for flavor trends. And one of the really interesting things I saw in beverages was the use of cardamom as a spice, which I tasted a lassi at one of the booths, and also one of the Tractor beverages, which a lot of fast casuals are using now. That was flavored with cardamom. And I'm sure there were coffees and teas as well on the floor which I didn't get a chance to sample, but cardamom seemed to be a flavor that was on the rise.
Interesting. And it's very prevalent in Turkish coffee. And it is a pumpkin spice, one of the many pumpkin spices, but not one that we see all that often. It's not like the charismatic cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves that,
right,
for example, is the base of Starbucks pumpkin spice latte. But it's an interesting new one that, obviously it's an ancient spice, but I'm psyched to see more of it. I like that.
Yeah. Did you taste any interesting beverages?
Well, my favorite thing, because it was interesting, I'd never seen anything like it before, was sprouted coffee. They take the beans when they're green, obviously remove the cherry, and then they apply heat, moisture, and time, and they cause the beans to sprout. And the result is a coffee that is less bitter and lower in acid. So kind of similar in flavor profile to a cold brew. And it's a new technique I hadn't seen. So that was fun.
I didn't get to that in the 2,000 booths that I tried to catch. But that is really interesting.
My colleagues were marveling about how much boba there was. I didn't see that much boba.
I didn't either. But speaking of, little round bubbly things, what I did see were some caviar, what I call caviar wannabes. So people are, caviar is kind of like an expensive product that not everybody uses, but there were like little caviar, finger lime caviar, which is the seeds inside finger limes, and they use that to garnish dishes, and it looks just like caviar. They're like little round globules. They don't taste like caviar. But one of the other things I did try was dulce, which is like a seaweed, and it comes in little round balls also, and that tasted like caviar. So that was kind of an interesting swap.
Yeah, that's a seaweed. I think it's from Ireland, maybe. And finger limes are Australian, and they're very astringent. They're a great way to add a little acidic and slightly bitter pop to your food. I also saw some little caviar balls made out of, not really caviar, made out of a reinforced fish stock.
Mm.
And then they did the whole Ferran Adrià spherification technique to make them into little bubbles and different flavors. There was a beautiful, brilliant blue one that I think was colored with spirulina, but I honestly don't remember.
Mm.
Um, but so they were kind of fishy and a little caviar like. And caviar is being used in so many casual situations now that I think having something that satisfies the visual appeal, which obviously is very important for social media, and delivers, a hint of the actual flavor of actual
Hmm.
caviar, I think is really smart. And of course, not everybody likes caviar. I went to one event where they were offering people caviar bumps, which I love, where you spoon the caviar on your hand and then you do it
Oh,
like
right. Yeah.
chocolate.
I tried that too.
I love that, but I was standing next to someone who'd never had caviar before, and she was hesitant, and rightly so, because she really didn't like it. And
Mm.
watching her sort of, run away, possibly to empty her mouth, was unfortunate. And I'm sorry that happened to her in public.
Well, at least she tried it.
That's right.
It's good to try everything once.
Yeah. Speaking of things to try, we went to an interesting dinner at Esmé, a fancy, fancy restaurant in Chicago, at which Unilever talked about trends that they were seeing. Food was certainly interesting and delicious. The trends, I don't know if we really need to go over them because I feel like they were more aspirational than real.
Hmm.
Like they were all about, reducing waste, which I'm totally on board with. But I don't think the general public I don't think that's their huge priority at the moment. They
Hmm.
like, you know, taste, convenience, and value.
Well, I think the dessert, where one of their trends is irresistible vegetables. So the dessert had like an edible, I guess, like film over it that you broke with your spoon, and it had all different vegetables on there, and you got kind of the taste of vegetables in with your panna cotta and some of the other elements that were underneath in the bowl. That was really interesting and delicious.
Yeah, and the presentation was really dramatic, as you said. It was sort of like a printed rice paper thing that
Right.
you had to uh, punch through, which was neat. And I really enjoyed the pork dish that
Mm.
Jeff prepared. It was a Puerto Rican lechon style, which is normally uh, roasted in a cajachina, a big sort of oven, a mobile oven. But in this case, he instead wrapped it in clay that was shaped like a pig, which was beautiful. And so when it was brought out, it was open. But the meat was so succulent and so well flavored. And what I really liked was the herbs that accompanied it, including cilantro and really good fresh oregano. And when I broke that up and put it on the pork, it was such a really it was so good that I'm talking about it right now, several
I
days.
know that was really delicious, and it was so tender. It was just amazing. I
Yeah.
mean, I think Esme, one of their trademarks is that they have a lot of art in the restaurant, and the food and the presentation reflects the art. So everything is very artfully presented. Like the fish course we had like a little wobbly placemat underneath that was filled with like little fish images, and then the bowl was put on top, and it was just such a beautiful presentation, and really experiential. I mean, it sort of engaged all your senses.
Yeah, and it was a great crowd too. A lot of food writers like us and similar people from all over the place in town for the restaurant show. So the
Yeah,
conversation was good and lively too, and the wines were sensational.
yeah, we had
So
a good time.
yeah,
Looking back, even though we're tired, we had some really good high points.
yes. And last week we talked about menu masters, so we don't have to do that again. So I think maybe we can move on to our guest who I interviewed a little while ago. Nathan Myhrvold, who wrote the really groundbreaking sort of encyclopedia on food called Modernist Cuisine. And I first met him when he came out with that many years ago, more than 10 years ago. He's actually the only author, I think, who ever visited me and brought his son. He brought his 16-year-old son, and, together they showed the galleys, and his son sort of chimed in every once in a while. I appreciated his confidence and his poise. And I actually got brownie points with my mother at the time. She was a big fan of Charlie Rose. Again, this was many years ago. But after Nathan Myhrvold visited me, he was on Charlie Rose, and my mom was fascinated. She emailed me. She said, "Do you know this guy, Nathan?" And I said, "Yes." He was just visiting me, and she was really delighted that I was on the same circuit as Charlie Rose. She thought
Yeah,
that
that's really impressive.
well, I mean, I guess it is. Yeah, I'll take the credit for that. Anyway, he's come out with his latest book, which he did with his colleague Francisco Migoya, Modernist Bread at Home. Because he came out with Modernist Bread, and then he decided to do something for the home cook.
Mhm.
But it's certainly, there's plenty still of interest for the professional cook. I'm going to play a little clip about why he came out with this cookbook and why it's different from some others.
There's a general feeling in the world of cookbooks that you have to make recipes simple, you have to dumb things down, you have to make stuff that everybody can make at home. And those are all great things, and they're useful for most cookbooks for most people. But I figured, hey, maybe there's room for something that tries to be more comprehensive, that doesn't talk down to you and explains how things work, that really is about indulging your curiosity about food and cooking as much as it is telling you how to do something.
And that's sort of where Nathan came from in cooking anyway. For years, he was the chief technology officer of Microsoft. So he's not doing it for money. And he just likes to explore different topics. He also writes long academic papers on dinosaurs, among other things.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
A real Renaissance man.
Yes. It helps if you make your fortune and then do whatever you want. But I respect that. He's a force for good in the world.
Yeah, I interviewed his Francisco once, his colleague who works on the books with him, and he told me about how long it took them to perfect the pizza, which went through so many steps in the first book, the Modernist Bread book. So I haven't seen this book for the home cook, but I hope it has a fewer steps. But that one seems very complicated.
It's one volume instead of 6. So,
oh, okay.
It's a few hundred pages instead of a few thousand. Mm-hmm. But he explained why he thinks people should experiment with bread.
People can be very intimidated by bread because the proofing process and using the yeast and all those things are unfamiliar. If you haven't done it before, it can be very intimidating. And one of the things that I encourage people to do, whether they buy my books or not, I don't care, is bake bread. Try it. Because it turns out, as you were saying a moment ago, even a less than ideal loaf of homemade bread is still homemade bread. It's pretty good.
Delicious.
And of all of the cooking ingredients to fool around with, you can't get anything cheaper than flour. If you were working with, truffles or caviar or something that's super expensive, then you might say, okay, let's really get my skills set before I go and blow a bunch of money on this thing. But there's a great debate we used to have of my big bread book weighs about 50 pounds. So what's more instructive, my big bread book or a 50-pound sack of flour, and you just cook your way through it?
Yeah, so he has a point.
Yeah.
The challenge with bread, of course, is it takes a while to do. But I used to bake bread a lot when I lived in Bangkok, of all places, I would invite friends over for dinner, and I pretty much always baked bread, and I usually baked challah, because I'm Jewish. I can bake challah if I want. Although actually, my challah recipe was derived from one from Bon Appetit magazine. Wasn't a family recipe.
Mm,
Um, although I did replace the butter in that recipe with schmaltz or chicken fat,
mm,
because again, I'm Jewish. Cook with
yeah.
schmaltz.
Braided breads have this fundamental issue, which is initially you're supposed to roll the bread out into a couple of cylinders. And then you are manipulating those cylinders to braid it. Well, the basics of braiding aren't that difficult. People have braided hair or rope, that's not the hard part. The hard part is getting those cylinders to be even. And the main problem with that is that the flour has gluten in it. The gluten is what is going to make the bread chewy and fluffy, and it's very important. But it's also very elastic. And so you squeeze and it comes back, and you squeeze and it comes back. And then you really lean on it, and then it's too thin, and you can't get the rest of it that way. So I had the idea that we should try a proteolytic enzymes. So that sounds really like a scary word, but it turns out there's a bunch of fruits that have enzymes that will attack protein. Papaya, fig, those are two great examples of it. Pineapple. And so those are used often in meat tenderizing because you have a tough piece of meat. If you degrade the protein strength just a little bit, the meat is not as tough. So it turns out if you make challah and you add just 1 or 2 drops of fresh pineapple juice. So here's our recommendation for that. You don't have to buy a whole pineapple. Go to Whole Foods and buy a little container of fruit salad that'll have like a little wedge of pineapple in it. You take one of those little wedges and you squeeze it carefully over a spoon and just get a couple of drops, and it will braid like a dream.
So that's a good trip.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to try that. I haven't made challah in a while, but now I'm inspired.
Yeah, I haven't baked bread in quite a while, even though like in Bangkok it was hard. I had an oven that didn't really have a thermostat. I just had, turn on the heat and figure it out. And that was part of the fun for me. And it was just me and my friends. It was always going to be fine because it's homemade bread. Homemade bread is
Right.
good. And it was different every time, but who cares? But now my bread, I haven't baked in a while, but the last time I tried, my bread had gotten worse. I don't know what happened. I've somehow lost my bread mojo. But as we've already discussed, I've moved. I'm settled in a new kitchen. It might be a really good time.
Right. Yeah,
to start
definitely.
messing around with bread again.
What kind of yeast did you use in Thailand? Because I can't imagine. Whenever I've baked, I've used the little packets, of active dry yeast because that's more foolproof than using a cake, or probably what Nathan uses is much more elaborate.
Well, it depends on what the bread is, and he talked about that a little bit in the interview. I used the packaged powdered yeast also.
Oh, okay.
And it worked great until it stopped working, and that was after I came back to the US. But as you know, there was a weird sort of sourdough thing that happened during the pandemic. Everybody wanted
Right.
to make sourdough, and Nathan Mirvold has some myth busting thoughts about sourdough.
People will start sourdough cultures by putting weird shit in. It was our simple explanation. They'll take raisins and soak the raisins in water and claim that raisin water makes their sourdough start faster. And there's a whole bunch of things that are like that. Well, the problem with that is that a typical sourdough culture has dozens at least of different strains of yeast and bacteria. Well, the yeasts that you want are yeasts that can eat starch, and not all yeasts do eat starch. So wine yeasts, or yeasts that you find in grapes, that, if you look at grapes up close, you can see they're kind of whitish in between the folds. That's yeast that was on the original grapes. Yeast on grapes is also, you get a blush kind of a thing, and you can sometimes polish it off on a grape. Grape yeasts want sugar because grapes are full of sugar. They don't help your sourdough at all. In fact, they hurt your sourdough. Now, it fools you because if you put these things in, you see lots of fizzing very quickly. You say, oh, look, my sourdough starter has started. And the answer is no. What happened is your sourdough starter was invaded by a bacteria, or yeasts primarily in this case, that love sugar. Those yeasts ate up the sugar from the raisins, and they're also present on the raisins. And you don't get to start cultivating the starch-eating fungus. Not fungus. No, it is fungus. Yeast. Yeast is a fungus. You don't get to start to cultivate those ones that you want that eat starch until you get that out of the way. So your sourdough starter actually is ready more quickly if you skip the damn raisins.
So skip the raisins.
Okay. I've never used raisins, but I haven't had much success with sourdough. I think it takes some practice because I have tried making it and the loaves came out like rocks. So I guess I wasn't on the right track, but yeah, I definitely want to. I mean, challah is more fun because it's much lighter and fluffier, and it's almost foolproof because it has all those eggs in it too. So
That helps, and it's fun to play with.
yeah,
I never cared if my braids were uneven. I think,
no, me neither.
yeah, it
Mhm.
made it look homemade.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
what.
I'm really inspired to try bread baking again. Thank
Well,
you.
I have more. I have some more things that will inspire you more. For like, one thing I really like. I like many things about Nathan Myhrvold, but one thing I like is that he enjoys busting myths, including the importance of the water that you use. This is a huge debate about bagels, and I've always found it silly. Not the water. Whatever it is, it's other things, not the water.
Another thing is, the water is so important. You can't use chlorinated water because chlorinated water will kill the yeast and it'll ruin your bread. So we made yeast solutions with and bread dough with all kinds of water, including water from my swimming pool, which has a ridiculous amount of chlorine in it. It does not taste good. Do not drink your swimming pool. And we connected these to show it visually. One thing that's big about our books is we try to show things visually. Is we put all of these yeast cultures in flasks or bottles, and we put a balloon over the top so you could see the gas rise. The pool water one was just as big as the others.
Wow, it sounds like he has a lot of fun there. It's like he's playing in a laboratory and making delicious things to eat in the meantime.
Yeah, and again, that's the benefit of already having had a successful career. You can mess around as much as you want with the other stuff, and then he keeps, coming up with successful books, and I guess academic pieces on dinosaurs. I have a friend who's a paleontologist. Maybe I'll ask him about that.
Mm.
He's also a bird watcher and bird aficionado, so I've been sending him videos of the birds flying around my new neighborhood so he can explain to me what's going on with them. But I have just one more clip from my interview with Nathan that I think is quite important for our audience who are baking because he debunks a myth about overproofing.
Mm.
A problem you can have in bread is if your bread is overproofed. You let it ferment or proof for too long. So I was wondering, what's wrong with it? Can we save it? And so we developed something we call dough CPR, where we would overproof the dough. If you bake the dough that's overproofed that way, it would yield bread, but it wouldn't be great bread. Turns out all you have to do is punch it and then knead it down and let it rise again.
That's it?
That's it.
Oh, well, that's good to know.
So there's one poor loaf or batch of bread, not loaf, it wasn't a loaf at the time, and ultimately it was loaves. We did this 13 times too. So this is like the cruel paramedic who does a plomp and does CPR, and the person comes to life, and then they smother them, and then they do it again 13 times. The bread was fine.
Now, fortunately, bread is not sentient, so you can do that. It's not a problem. But like you can mess around with the bread all you want, and flour is cheap. All the ingredients in bread are cheap. I mean, if you're really making traditional challah, you might want to add some saffron threads. I never did. It seemed excessive and not necessary. But it seems like a book that can give you a lot of advice. And the overproofing thing. Other books say that once you've overproofed your bread, you got to throw it away. And which bread is not expensive, but it's very time consuming. So
Yeah.
nice to know that you can just punch it down, knead it, and start over. I talked to him a little bit more about that it does increase the acidity a little teeny tiny bit, so that it actually can give the bread a more robust flavor a little bit.
Mm. Yeah, especially if you're doing something like rye bread, which you like to have that little bit of acid flavor.
Yeah. So there, I've become updated on what's going on with bread, and it was great to reconnect with Nathan.
Yeah. I wonder if as many people are still baking after the pandemic, or if they got burnt out, so to speak.
Yeah, I have a feeling that they're over it, but I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you remember that bread baking machines were all the rage for a while, and you don't hear about them as much anymore. I don't know why.
No.
It seems like such a great solution, even though, as I understand it, the crusts weren't always awesome.
Yeah, I had one and I actually gave it away because it really, I mean, they come out almost like supermarket bread. It's very uniform. It doesn't feel homemade. It smells good while it's baking, but I think the oven works much better and you get a better crust and you just get a better appearance for sure.
Well, we're recording this on a Friday, so in fact, the Friday of Memorial Day weekend. So I might have time to, do some baking. I might
Yeah.
try it.
Yeah, you should.
And I think that about does it for this week. But we'll see everybody again next week.
Yeah, well, enjoy your weekend, Brett, and I hope you bake a little, although it's going to be pretty hot in New York, so you might rethink that. Try try another time.
That-
But I know there'll be a lot of barbecuing going on too for
That's
people
for sure.
who have backyards.
Yes, which I do not. But I will, maybe I'll wander around and enjoy the smells
Yeah, well, enjoy your weekend, and
too.
we'll be back next week.
Yes, and everybody else, you'll be listening to this after Memorial Day, but I hope you had a good time.
From your fryer to the table, it's a quick trip for crispy fries. But how about a crosstown delivery? McCain SureCrisp fries are designed to go from fryer to container to carrier to passenger seat across town during rush hour, down a shortcut that wasn't all that short to a doorstep before they hit the table. And that first bite, the crispiness speaks for itself. To the last bite, McCain SureCrisp fries. Go the distance. See how far our fries can take your business at surecrisp.com/delivery.